So I don't know if you looked ahead on your syllabus. We've only got field sessions and then our last, what is supposed to be an in-person session, sort of wrapping up the whole course. We still have to see what size inside gatherings or even what size outdoor gatherings are going to be allowed in a month. But here we are, our last Zoom session. So this is a session on project management. And in my learning pod, a lot of people said, we want to talk a little bit more about how do you get started on your capstone project? Where do you start? What do you do? What are the steps? So I hope that what Josh provided for you guys in the previewing will be helpful in that. And then we have some things tonight that I think will further help us to flesh out. So Josh, take it away.
Yeah, so thanks, Suzanne. I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing my voice, but here we go again. And as Suzanne said, I hope that is a good roadmap. When you really start diving into project management in your individual projects, every site, every project's going to be a little bit different. So as you're working through it, as you have questions, that's what I'm here for, to help you navigate that and make sure it's tailored. But tonight we're going to dive into a few things. We have a project kind of case study that we're going to talk about. We're going to break up into some smaller groups and get everyone's feedback to see how a certain steward was successful, or maybe not as successful as they could be. And then I'm going to turn it over to Francesca, and you guys are going to dive into WSA's risk management policies and how to do the ever important reporting of your volunteer action as stewards. We're going to have some more extended questions after that. But I want to kind of also pivot from what Suzanne was saying, with this being our last in-person session. We wanted to pull our important upcoming dates to the front tonight so that everybody can focus on them. As everyone should know and should hopefully have in their folder, if you haven't emailed us with extenuating circumstances, your capstone part 2 was due tonight. If you've run into anything or if you have any concerns, just go ahead and let us know what's going on and we can work something out. I do want to signpost that WSA's offices are going to be closed from this Thursday to next Monday. So that's the 1st through the 5th for spring break. And then the next time we're going to see each other is going to be next Friday, April 9th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. That's going to be another great session. It's a big one. We're going to be going over the residential site assessment. I'm hoping to have most of the RSA stuff up and running tomorrow night before I close up shop for the week. And that'll give you an idea of what we're going to be diving into. But we're going to be at 3 sites in Crofton. I'm going to have some more details out to you next week. But kind of thinking about what we did for the field session this last time at Asbury Broadneck and in Cape St. Clair, come prepared to kind of walk around, bring your clipboards, and we'll have some other handouts and things for you for that evening. And like I said, we'll have more logistics coming hopefully early next week. We also, the next day, have our ELIT field intensive. That's going to be Arlington Echo. That'll be great because that's usually where our home base is. That's usually where you guys would be had it not been for COVID. So it would be really nice if you haven't seen it to see Arlington Echo. It's beautiful this time of year. And you should expect another logistics email coming from someone, probably Noel, next week. And then finally, on Saturday, April 17th, we're going to be doing our group project. I've talked to my pod about that. But every year, our stewards come together to do a project together to kind of get their hands dirty and their feet wet in regards to how to do a project, spacing plants, digging out beds, that sort of thing. This is going to look a little bit different this year. So the sites that we're visiting on next Friday to do the RSA, we're actually going to be returning to install some things that are great interventions for the problems we're going to be seeing. So, kind of a nice bookend to the whole thing. Suzanne, is there anything I missed?
So one thing is that for the Crofton sites, we're going to be at residences and just
Ah,
wanted to signpost that there's no restroom. We're not going to like go into people's houses to use the restroom if we want to, but there are nearby restrooms that are, in commercial establishments, including libraries. So Josh will have a list of sort of your nearby restrooms, but it is only a 2-hour class on that Friday night, April 9th. So we were anticipating that people might not have the need to use a restroom. On April 17th, it's a longer class, and we will provide a break so that people could drive perhaps to the library and use a restroom or to another location. And then one last thing is that these are all challenge by choice events. And if you're someone that is not yet comfortable doing coming out in the public for a variety of reasons people have, you can just let us know and we'll definitely have makeups later in the year. And then one last thing on the physical nature of the next two sessions, walking and standing, if those things are concerns for you and in the timing that we have, feel free to bring along a chair, particularly to the site assessment ones. If you have a lawn chair or something, can certainly sit down, but we won't be providing chairs on the residential site assessment night. So if you have concerns, you can feel free to contact us. So I think that was, oh, yes, also rain or shine. The April 9th and 10th will be rain or shine. In fact, it would be so great if it were raining on the 9th. We will put our order in for that because it's really fun to see sites in the rain. But if it doesn't rain, it'll be okay too. On the 17th, if we have like a torrential rainstorm for sediment and erosion control reasons, we will have to reschedule that. So we'll just have to play that by ear. It also is not so great to be digging and tromping around in soil that is wet because it causes compaction. So we just, we play that by ear. We'll give you as much heads up as we know. We'll be watching the weather.
Yeah,
That was long.
the restrooms were a big part of our logistical conversation. I can't believe I forgot that. We care about your guys' comfort. So with that, I'm just going to go very quickly over the learning objectives or the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve tonight. Hopefully you folks will be able to understand the basic considerations for project logistics and implementation. Hopefully that came out of your pre-session work. You'll have an understanding of WSA's risk management policies after tonight, and you'll know how to report your steward action. So Francesca, are you ready to separate us out?
Yep. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now for our first portion of the session. So please join it when it comes on your screen. Some of you will be staying in the main room.
Hi, everybody. It's a total surprise, like whoever I get. I'm like, I wonder who's going to be in my room.
I know I'm always waiting and I'm like, is it wrong that I didn't see the breakout session pop up?
I know, I always have a little panic, like, was I supposed to do something? Please tell me if I'm supposed to do something. So I see a lot of unassigned people, but maybe they're going to another room. So I have 6, 7, 8 of you. Let's just get started. Okay, so I'm going to read you a little scenario. This is a fictionalized scenario that is based on real capstone projects. And what we're going to do after that is have a little discussion around what did the steward in this case do that was really helpful to his or her capstone project, and then what could they have done to make their capstone project more successful. And again, we're talking about that logistics, project management-y kind of stuff. So hold tight. I'm going to read you a little story. So this is a fictional scenario based on real things that happened to stewards as they planned rainscaping capstone projects. We'll read through the scenario about a fall project and then identify some things the steward did that helped make their project successful. And then what might they have done differently? Okay, after the steward installed their capstone project, they provided the following reflection. I submitted my design to Josh in late spring. And remember, this is for a fall project. And also shared it with my community at an HOA meeting. The response was very positive, and I had a green light to move forward for the project on community property from my HOA's board. 6 weeks before the day of the project, I sent an email to my community through our HOA's list, telling everyone about my capstone project and explaining how it would fight stormwater. I asked people to volunteer the day of planting. I also reached out to 2 certified stewards who live about a mile away from a mile away in a different neighborhood. They were excited to hear about my project, and they told me they would support me in any way that I needed. At noon on the Wednesday, 2 weeks before the installation date, so that's a little more than 2 weeks before the project, when it was time to order plants, I got my list to Josh right on time. The process was simple, and I got lucky. The nursery had all the plants I wanted, so no substitutions were necessary. Josh told me that usually doesn't happen, so I was relieved. The week of my project didn't go as I expected. When I contacted the 2 certified stewards on Monday morning, that project was Saturday, so on Monday morning, I contacted the 2 stewards and I told them I needed them to bring tools and snacks to the project on Saturday, and they said they couldn't help. I was so disappointed, but WSA was able to supply me with the tools I needed. Then I got nervous that I hadn't heard from very many people in my community about whether or not they were going to volunteer. I reached out to 2 neighbors, and I'm glad I did because they were some of the only people who ended up coming to the planting. One neighbor had 2 kids, but only the younger was able to help. The older one had sports. My neighbor explained that if the planting had been at a later time, her older child and other families in the neighborhood would have loved to participate. I'm glad I emailed my WSA class to share the information about my project because most of the volunteers were fellow classmates. One classmate ended up being in charge of the sign-in sheet and another was able to take photos. I'm glad they did because I would have forgotten to do so. I was just so focused on making sure the plants were installed correctly. Overall, I think the project looks great and I'm excited to have a finished capstone project. While I was disappointed that people in my community and the stewards in the neighboring community weren't interested in supporting my project, I do feel fortunate that I have such great support from the members of my class. Okay, so first of all, what went well? You guys can just unmute, and what do you think the steward did that was really helpful?
Presented at the HOA meeting.
Great, good. What else?
Well, she selected the right plants, he or she, sorry.
Yep.
It sounds like she coordinated well enough with WSA staff, with Josh, although a little late, perhaps. It was lucky that she got the plants she wanted. But
Well,
No, that was correct.
yeah, so 2 things about that. She did submit the plant order at the right time because you sometimes don't know the availability more than a couple days, a couple weeks in advance. But what she didn't do is give too long of a heads up about needing tools. And that's really an important thing. During the ELIT session at Arlington Echo, we're going to be going over the process for reserving tools and outreach materials and other things so that you know what that is. But if there's more than one capstone project on a weekend, and there always is, another steward could have already reserved those tools. So you want to do it more than the week before. Good. All right, what else did she do that was really successful?
Actually talked to some of the neighbors.
Great. So she ended up calling those 2 neighbors at the very end. What could she have done to get more volunteers?
Did she have her 3 little projects? Whatever they're called, I forget.
Outreaches, yeah.
Outreaches. She didn't have those?
Did she? Well, it looks like she presented to the HOA.
Yeah.
And she sent an email, but did that end up being sufficient to get volunteers?
Nope.
no.
So how else could she have gotten more volunteers?
It's interesting to me that she did the right thing in reaching out to the other two stewards, and then she was disappointed that they didn't show up and couldn't do it. That's all about follow up. That's all about just communication from the get go. And possibly she could have asked them to help make a few phone calls to maybe reach some people as time was getting closer and closer.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. So if someone asked any of you, hey, I'm going to do my project in about 6 weeks, would you like to help me? You might say, sure, but if you didn't have the time or the date or what you needed to have done, and you didn't talk to them at all in the intervening weeks, you're right.
Yeah.
Chances are. Yeah. What else could she have done to get more volunteers? It's great that she had other volunteers from the WSA class, but the point of a capstone project isn't to get you guys to plant a project, it's to get her community to. So what else could you do to get more volunteers?
I'm on my HOA. Nobody reads the notifications. Nobody reads them. And so I was just having this conversation with my neighbor right now, like an hour ago, about a green alley. You have to knock on doors and you have to physically talk to people instead of just emailing and like assuming people are gonna read your email.
That's
and
great.
talk with them more than once. I mean, remind them, call a few days before, can I count on you? Are you coming? You can't just expect they'll remember.
So I kind of disagree with that. I don't think that we should be knocking on doors, and like I have a real issue with the sort of pushed, I feel like if, I'm not sure what she could do differently. I think that's kind of a hard thing to answer, but I absolutely would be curious what Susan thinks about knocking on doors and asking 2 and 3 times or things like that. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
That doesn't sit with me.
I think every steward in every community is different. So you got to find the thing that works for you. I'll tell you that I have a steward that I greatly admire who lives in a community in Severna Park, and she had a big project there that she was trying to get through. And the way that she had to engage her community is to knock on doors and say, hey, we're doing this project. I want you to know about it. Here's information about it. Let me know if you want to talk about it. So I think that's one way to go about it, but also people have in the past done signs, like signs along the side of the road that say planting on this day. People have done, Facebook posts. The other thing that's really helpful is to think about like, who are the groups in your community and get the leaders of those groups to send out an email, because they might not read the HOA email, but they might read the garden club email or the Girl Scout troop email or the whatever club email. So I do think you got to find the right method of communication that works for your community and try different methods. But there is one thing that really sticks out to me, and I forget how much more time we have, so I'll say it, is that she just chose a time for her project. She didn't really ask her community what would be a good time. And if she knew her like primary audience was families with kids, she probably should have asked ahead of time, hey, families with kids, when would be a good time to do this project? Because if she'd had it later in the day, more families with kids would have been able to participate. So I think that is also a really good, like, to get buy-in from folks. And obviously you can't ask everyone, but like thinking about who are the major players and getting an idea of when would be good. Does anybody else have any other ideas, other than knocking on doors, or other ideas for Lynette about getting volunteers out?
It may not work for this kind of a situation, but I always try asking for an RSVP and tell them it's because I'm going to provide like food or drink or whatever, and I need a head count to order the pizza or whatever. And that usually gets people's attention. So they will at least tell you yes or no, or, oh, I need pepperoni or whatever. So that sometimes works. I don't know if we're allowed to provide food, are we?
In this COVID, where we are right now with COVID, we're not, but maybe that will get restricted. But there, I do think asking for an RSVP is a good idea.
Yeah.
And then you can collect the emails of the people that are coming and send them a reminder. You could ask for RSVPs because I'm going to have, additional details as the time gets closer. That works for some communities. Some
Right.
communities it doesn't. When we talk about risk management, we have some forms that you guys can use for release of liability and photo release. And if you have RSVPs, you can send them the form ahead of time to fill out if you want to. Some people like not fly by the seat of their pants, but just their schedule is so crazy. They know right before they're doing it that they're doing it. They might not be able to commit, and that's okay too. What other things went well? Or did you notice other things that the steward did that was well, or other things that the steward could have done to make their project go better?
I just made a note of like prior notice. She could have been a little bit better about prior notice. And I also said community engagement. So I'm guessing when she reached out to the community and didn't have any responses, that is when you would make the next step to then see how you could further get contact, because just leaving it and then expecting people just to show up to your event isn't going to work.
Nope.
Great. It's a great point. Really good point. What about the day of the event? What was helpful to her on the day of the event?
Well, she was lucky someone else was taking photographs, but I was surprised to learn in the readings that we're not really supposed to be like working that day. I mean, I can't even imagine not working, but whatever. We'll try.
It's so hard. It's really hard to be the person not putting the plants in the ground. Just like if you're in this most of the time, you're like, I want to be digging, but you really have to be the person like making sure everybody's got something to do and talking to people about the project. You might get to put in a plant or two, and that's great, but really your job is to make sure that the community is engaged in the planting. So you're right, it is essential to identify people for those key roles ahead of time. You should absolutely have someone at the sign-in table to make sure that everybody coming gets the right information, and absolutely have someone making sure everybody has a media release so that you can use those pictures. Because if you don't have a media release, if one person doesn't sign the media release, or you don't know that everybody has given you permission for the media release, then you can't use your pictures to promote, which is sad. Francesca will go over that later.
I was thinking like too, does anyone ever do it over even a small project to say, we're going to work on this 2 hours on Friday night from 7 to 9, or well, it's not like, it'll be like till 9, maybe, no, anyhow. And then, Saturday morning or whatever the days end up being, back to back probably is best, I'm guessing. Just to give a couple options if the steward is available to do that.
That is great point, Lynette. And that is something that has been very successful for capstones during COVID, because it says, she's everyone, time to rejoin. Do we have to go anywhere? Or are we in the main?
You're right here. You can finish up
Okay.
your sentence. I'll let everybody
Okay.
else back
All
in.
right. So it's been really successful because people have wanted to have fewer people on a site at a time to split up times. And in fact, sometimes people have done projects where they've had families sign up for times in family groups, so that your family's time is 10 o'clock on Saturday, yours is 11 o'clock on Saturday. And so you can spread things out a little bit.
Francesca, I was going to share for you, right?
Yeah, you can, sure. Thanks. Okay. So thank you guys for coming back. I hope that that was really helpful. We're kind of working through that scenario and thinking about, you know, things to do and not to do. So I am going to now go through some risk management. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're just going to kind of talk about what risk management means for you as stewards and just provide some context.
Lenovo laptop, as well as I've seen certain comments.
Okay, so what is risk management? Risk management is identifying risks and taking steps to reduce them in advance. What is liability? Liability is the state of being responsible for something. And then a very important question, does WSA have liability insurance? And the answer is that yes, we do. And that liability insurance applies for all WSA-led events. And when that's the case, it applies for all participants on the site of that event.
That includes the project as well as these classes?
Yes, and we will, if we can hold questions until the end, that would be super helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I just said a WSA-led event. You might be wondering what that is. So a WSA-led event is any event that's organized and led by WSA staff. So class, for example, you know, the field session that we had last week, any event where staff is present. Capstones projects fall under that. And then steward-led events are events that are organized and led by stewards. So WSA staff might be present, we might not. We might know about it, we might not. And for those events, we have forms that you can use, and we strongly suggest and strongly recommend that you use those forms in order to protect yourself and your community. In that case, you would handle any forms and waivers, and I'll kind of go into what those forms are and what that means. And then the final circumstance we're going to talk about is being a steward and what that means, what is within your role, what's outside of your role of steward, and kind of where you fit in the WSA family in terms of these things. So WSA-led events and projects are handled by WSA staff internally. So for the waivers and the forms and releases, we handle all of that. There's two types. The event release form is what you signed to join the field session last week, right? So that is, you signed it electronically via DocuSign. And then we also have a property owner agreement. So property owners sign this when we're installing a project on site, for example, a class project or a tree trooper installation. And that's also electronic signatures, the same DocuSign that you used the other day. And again, we handle that internally. We store the forms, everything. And then for steward-led, there we go. So for steward-led, we strongly recommend, as I said, that you use the forms available to you. This screenshot down here, you may have noticed on our website under Tools for Stewards, there's something called Stewards Only. That page is a password protected website for stewards. And so once you are certified stewards, you'll have access to that. And there's tons and tons of resources on that page for you. And that's where these forms will live. For now, I'm going to put the forms on the class website so that you can kind of view them and look at them, and you can download them as needed. Sorry, if you could go back one. So when you are using these forms, you should work with your community and include them in the forms where possible. They might also have language that they'd like you to include as well, kind of depending on, you know, the structure of your community, whether there's an HOA, kind of what formal entities lie in there. They might have things that they'd like you to include. All right, so which form do you need to use when it's a steward-led event or, you know, situation? So the event release is what you'll use if you are hosting an event with people, such as a planting or an invasives removal or trash cleanup or anything else. The signer who's signing that form agrees that you, the steward, are not liable. They're also agreeing currently that they do not have COVID symptoms, and that if they have symptoms that appear after signing the form, they will not join the event. And they also have an option on the form you may have noticed the other day to indicate yes or no that for the media release that photos will be taken and they can be shared with them and they release that that right. Then the other form is the property owner agreement. So you'll use this if you're installing a project on somebody else's property. The signer in this context is agreeing that you, again, are not liable for any damage or harm and that they will maintain the project for a period of time. Now, just a note on the media release. So we love, love, love to share your photos from Stewards events. But just remember that by sending us the photos, you are indicating that everybody in the photos signed the media release and gave permission for those photos to be viewed and shared. So we're not going to collect the forms from you. We're not going to check that. But when you share the photos with us, you're indicating that you will that you have done that and that we are allowed to share those photos. So just keep that in mind and we'll give you directions, as Suzanne just said in the chat, for sharing photos too. All right, so let's try a scenario. So I'm going to have, Suzanne is going to read this kind of circumstance and we're going to work through what we would do in this situation.
Okay, this is Taylor's ELIT capstone. Taylor is planning an ELIT capstone project. Taylor will be gathering families in their community to learn about invasives. Taylor's neighbors will gather to go on a socially distanced nature walk to learn about invasive plants. 2 weeks later, the families will reconvene at the neighborhood playground to remove English ivy and create a ring of life for the trees. A few weeks later, Taylor will get together outside with their neighbors to reflect on the action they took and find out what they would like to do next. So what does Taylor need to do to help manage the risk? So you can type in the chat. Oh, there's 2 questions coming up. There's 2 poll questions. What kind of event is this? Is it a steward-led event or a WSA-led event? And then who needs to sign the forms? Who needs to store the forms? Okay. So Francesca, oh, they're coming in. They're coming in.
Yes.
People are weighing in.
All right, so I think we've got almost everybody. A couple more people are coming in and then I will share the results. Okay, so really, really good job. Almost everybody got it right. So this is a steward-led, oh, sorry, Suzanne, go for it.
Yeah. This is actually a WSA-led event because it's a capstone project and you're part of the class. If a WSA staff person is going to be there, the WSA staff person can do all of the forms that you need and can take care of all of that. There are circumstances where, like for your outreach events, if a WSA staff is not involved in the planning and execution, it would be a steward-led. But for your capstone year, a lot of times the WSA can call that a WSA-led event. After your steward year, your capstone project is done, then you'll take it over from there. Or if you have an event where a WSA staff is not there, which actually it wasn't even specified in there. I didn't think about that before. It would be you do your own, but your mentor can help you with that. And then who would need to store the forms? If WSA does them, WSA stores them.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. So now we're going to, if you guys could type in the chat some other things, if you could just go back one, yep, some other things that Taylor needs to do to manage risk for this event. Go ahead and type in anything else that you can think of.
Like what form does Taylor need or WSA need to do? What form would be appropriate?
We got a couple photo releases, Jim and Meg, yep.
Manage group size,
Media
great.
release, yep. And the media release is included in the other forms. So let's see who can type that in there. Which form is that they need?
There's just 2 forms. One form is the event release and one form is the property owner agreement refreshments.
Perfect.
So yeah, so just the event release is all that is needed for this one, not
All
the
right.
property owner agreement.
Perfect. And Josh, if you could hit the next one. So we have the event release for each gathering. Oh, sorry about that. That's got all jumbled. But If you can go back one, Josh. So Taylor has multiple gatherings, right? There's a nature walk, and then there's another thing at the playground, and then there's another thing. So Taylor needs forms for all of those. And then when sharing the photos, Taylor needs to make sure that they have made sure the media release part was indicated. So it's a yes or no on that form. So if anybody said no, then Taylor needs to make sure that the forms aren't, the photos aren't shared.
So Linda asked a really important question in the chat, and this is actually something that we just like reviewed and tried to get a little policy distinction on. Do you need a signed form from the HOA? So if you're just doing a gathering at a place, you don't need the HOA to sign that they're releasing you from liability, because you're not really doing anything to the site. However, if you were doing, oh, you know what, that's right, this is this is the invasive removal. For the invasive removal, because that's a project, you would want the HOA to sign the property owner agreement. I didn't catch that when we were talking about it, but if you're doing a project, like if you're making any changes to a site, you need to have that property owner sign the property owner agreement. Which basically says, hey, you can do this to my trees. Because what happens if, you're working on the English ivy and then the HOA, whoever you talked to said it was okay, but the whole HOA didn't know, and they really like that English ivy and they didn't want you to cut it down. So you need to have something to cover yourself that you are actually doing something on their property and it's okay. Now, you would not need to have the HOA sign for the walk or the reflection, because you're not. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, type it in the chat, say that doesn't make sense. Go ahead, Francesca.
Thank you. And then there's another question. So Lynn has asked who signs for the HOA? Is it the HOA board president?
Yeah, so every board's governance documents are different. So the HOA will know who the appropriate signatory is. I would, if you don't know that, I would ask the board chair who the signatory is if you have any questions. But it's usually the chair or someone on the executive committee who signs. But it's, every HOA is different.
Great. All right. And Josh, if you could skip ahead too, we're going to try another scenario. And do you want to read this for us?
Sure. Sonia, Class 9 steward, is planning a project in her neighborhood. To prepare the site, she and several neighbors will remove invasives at a shared space in the community. 1 week later, the same neighbors and others are coming out to help plant natives at the site. They will be socially distanced and children are welcome.
All right, so we've got another poll coming up. So what kind of event is this? WSA led or steward led? And therefore, who needs to store the signed forms?
You guys are rocking it. Can they see the results? They can't. Only
not as they're coming in,
okay,
but
all
I
right.
will share. All right. Really, really well done. Almost everybody. This is steward led. So what are some things that Sonia needs to do to manage risk for this event? Go ahead and type it in the chat.
So which of those two forms does Sonia need?
We've got event form from Elizabeth. We've got, okay, event release. We've definitely got that. We need the event release. Is there any other form we need?
Yeah, people are sort of saying it, permission from the site. So that property owner agreement.
Perfect.
Is there,
yeah.
someone, I just lost it. Someone asked, is there a different release for children? That is such a good point. Melissa,
yeah.
can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, if you want to hit the next slide. So that is definitely one of the other things. So on this one, we have event release for invasive removal day, event release for the planting day, the property owner agreement signed by an HOA representative, and minors need to be accounted for on the event release form. So you may have noticed this on the form, or you may have just looked right past it because we didn't have any minors involved in class last week. But there is a box that said, I am a parent or guardian signing for minors. And then there's a line for them to put the names of any minors involved. So that definitely needs to be accounted for. If minors are there, they need to be signed for on those event releases. So thank you so much for asking that, Melissa. And then again, we need to check, Sonia needs to check the media release answers before sharing photos with us. Okay, great. Good job. I hope everybody feels a little bit better about that. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit. And Suzanne is going to talk about the Watershed Steward Agreement.
All right, great. So Elmer just asked, are there tool limitations for minors? So if you are doing a planting with minors, you want to work with your capstone mentor to get a plan for what types of tools. There should be tool limitations for lots of people, actually, not just minors. And when we do our class project, we'll actually be talking about tool safety because that is a thing. So it's a really important point. Thanks, Elmer, for bringing that up. Okay, so you've just been through this course, the Watershed Stewards Academy course, and you're about to do your capstone project. And when your capstone project's done, you will be an official certified watershed steward. And what we have, which actually is currently under review and getting revised, is a little agreement that basically outlines your role as a watershed steward and your relationship to WSA. Basically some of the things involved in how WSA and stewards relate to one another, that there's no employment relationship, and that there's not liability coverage that covers you out in your community, and articulates the risk management policy. It also explains the role of a watershed steward, and this actually came up in my learning pod, and we'll be talking about this a little bit more in subsequent learning pods and in the RSA videos and preparation materials. But, you know, as a watershed steward, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to do big projects? It sort of articulates what are the limits of what you do as a watershed steward independently, and what might you need to have professional help to do according to your training. Now, there are some people in this room that have training that makes you qualified to do bigger projects, and you should go forth and do that in your role as whatever you're trained to do. But as a watershed steward, unfortunately, you did not get training that allows you to do big stormwater projects. We will, this agreement basically says, hey, I'm agreeing to be a watershed steward. I know what my role is, and it's in effect for about 3 years, for 3 years, but you can void it anytime. If there's any time that you want to say, oh, I don't really want to be a watershed steward anymore. Circumstances have changed. My life is different. It's just not for me. You can void it at any time. But this agreement helps us to understand who wants to be an active watershed steward and who isn't, so that we can have an accurate role of who stewards are. And Elmer asked a question, which is, explain voluntary, not regulatory. I'm not quite sure what that means, but let's go through the whole presentation so we can get through everything. And then Elmer, maybe we can talk after about what that question means. So next slide, I think. Okay, so your role as a watershed steward, what hopefully you will be able to do when you leave this class, is address and identify pollution sources and restoration opportunities. Nobody expects you to be able to do this all by yourself for all circumstances. So if at any time you need help, that's why we're here. That's why other certified stewards are here, and that's why we have the consortium of support professionals. We'll also hope that you'll be able to educate your community on pollution sources and how they can help. Engage your community in small rainscaping practices like conservation landscapes and tree plantings and small rain gardens, and then connect the community with restoration resources and professionals, particularly as it relates to those larger projects. Now, there are a lot of watershed stewards that do big projects, and that is, that's all good. But when you do a bigger project, you typically have a professional for design or installation that really does the heavy lifting in terms of big stormwater management. Great. So Nancy, on the database, Francesca's going to do that next. And what about WSA project maintenance? That's also going to be the subject of our class project day on April 17th. But essentially, all projects come with a maintenance agreement that goes to whoever owns them. And we do have that monitoring group that goes out to sort of make sure people don't have questions about monitoring and maintaining their project. But that's actually it. We could have a whole class on that, Marie, on maintenance. I'm so glad you asked that question, but I'll stop talking about that particularly right now.
I meant as a role of a steward, because my community is looking to me to help them maintain living shorelines that I didn't put in, but I'm learning how to, remove invasives from.
Yeah.
So isn't that a role of a steward as well?
As a steward, I think that your role could be to help your community identify how to maintain their projects. I doubt that for a living shoreline, one individual is going to be able to do everything, and certainly your volunteer time is your time. So that should be one thing that you could do if that's the way that you want to spend your time. Certainly, maintaining projects is a really big thing. And actually, at our last session, the last in-person session, we'll be talking about the steward action groups, and one of those action groups is the maintenance group. So there's actually a group of stewards that does maintenance for their job. Francesca, do I have time for another question, or do you want to move on? I see Elmer has his hand up.
Yeah, I think we should move on, and we can have some extended discussion. We can talk about questions.
Yeah, sorry, we're going to move on to the next subject, but gosh, this is so much good discussion, so we can definitely have more. And we can actually make this the subject of a steward learning pod too. What is the role of the steward? Oh, sorry, I'm still on this slide. Oh, okay, so stewards should not independently. So we did not train you to do larger projects, and we're identifying projects that have a drainage area of more than 600 square feet, which is about a downspout. 400 to 600 square feet is usually what comes out of one downspout, that has a slope greater than 10%. That has a type C soil or failed perk test. So a place, we don't want you to be responsible for trying to deal with water in a place where water's not draining, or proximity to utilities or road right of way. We also don't want you to work in areas where you would be concentrating or redirecting the flow onto another property or toward buildings. There are some urban locations or some difficult sites where you sort of have to do that, but that you would want to call in a stormwater professional if you had a complicated site. As a watershed steward, you are a volunteer, and you shouldn't be working as a steward and receiving payment for your services. That would be a employment or contractual relationship, and so that gets into all kinds of funny IRS stuff. We'd like you to just refer, if you have questions, to the scope document, the rainscaping scope document, which gives you an idea of the scale of projects. But I want to say one really important thing about this slide. Ultimately, as a watershed steward, you're going to graduate, and some of you are going to be totally comfortable installing a conservation landscape, and some of you are going to be totally uncomfortable installing a conservation landscape. Some of you are going to want to go out and walk neighbors' properties, and you'll be really comfortable making suggestions of, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do that. Some of that comfort comes with time, but some people just don't ever feel comfortable with some skills. You know, there's some people that are great educators or talkers or engagers, and there are other people that are great putting things in the ground and feel comfortable with plants. You should only do as a watershed steward what you feel comfortable doing. If there's something that you want to be able to do that you don't feel comfortable with yet, you should let us know and we'll set you up with people to mentor you so that you feel more comfortable. And then you should also just feel free to refer people in your neighborhood to someone, another watershed steward who does have those skills or who is comfortable, or even the WSA staff. So this is really a situation where you should do what you feel proficient to do. And it's really hard at the end of this long class to feel like you've learned everything, but don't worry, as you start working in your neighborhood, you'll get more and more comfortable.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what happens after you're a certified steward. So we're going to talk about reporting steward action and what that means and why it matters. So right now you are all steward candidates, and soon after you complete your projects and everything else that you need to complete for the course, you will be certified master watershed stewards. So we ask that certified stewards perform a minimum of 40 hours of community service in the form of watershed action every year, complete an additional 8 hours of continuing education. If you attended the conference, that typically is that whole 8 hours of continuing education right there. So that's something you can do every year. And then also we ask you to report your steward action. So I'm going to talk what that means. So, what is report? Why does it matter? So it's so important for you to report your action because it allows us to raise funds and recertify stewards. So your impact on Anne Arundel County is huge. It's absolutely immeasurable. And it's impossible to measure, but we do need you to try. So especially by June and December. June and December, because that is when we put together reports for Anne Arundel County and we get a lot of our funding from them. So by being able to show just how much impact you all are having in the county, it allows them to say, yes, this is impactful and we can keep funding this. So that's really, really important that you report your action. All right. So what do you report? So your action is things like projects and outreach. That's the steward action. So projects would be things like installation of a project or a conservation landscape, maintenance, monitoring, assessing. Those are all kind of project-based action. And then we also have outreach-based action, and that is community engagement, K through 12, engagement, environmental committees. So you might serve on a committee for a watershed organization or for the county. And then when you go on the web portal that you explored, and we'll talk a little bit about, you'll see planning. Most action will be captured, like the planning part of it will be captured when you report the action. So for example, you'll go and say, I did K through 12, and it'll ask how many hours did you spend planning for this event. But sometimes you'll have a really, really big project that takes a really, really long time, and you'll be just doing planning, and you'll be doing a lot of things to make a future project happen, but it's not quite happening yet. So that's why that's an option. Then for continuing education, that would be things like conferences, classes, other courses, and then also networking. So that doesn't count for your action hours, but it's great to capture and really important to see. So that would be things like social steward engagements and other local networking events. All right, so the reporting system, you all have your usernames now. I hope that most of you had a chance to explore that a little bit. You may have had a question. Why does it say Sea Grant Maryland? Why are there other WSAs in there? So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of explain where we fit into all of that. So you may or may not know that our WSA is the original WSA. So we have worked with Sea Grant, which is a partner with University of Maryland Extension, and we've worked with them to set up WSAs in other counties across Maryland so that there are now more of us all over that can have the same kind of impact. So this new reporting system was put together by University of Maryland Extension. If you are already a master gardener or master naturalist, then you'll probably be used to this system or something similar. So just to kind of provide some context for that, I wanted to explain that a little bit. All right, so how do you report your steward action? You go to the website. I think there was an issue with the link I sent out, but hopefully most of you now saw the updated one. But you go to wsa.umd.edu and you log in, and I'm going to now share my screen so that you can kind of see what that looks like when you log in if you have not already. So you should be able to see this. So I'm going to log into my account. Oh no, some of you got that error the other day, I think. Okay. All right, so I'm logging in here. At the top where it says forms, that's where I'm going to report my action. So let's say I have a project and I would like to say that I did some maintenance on it. That is where you'll get there. So we've got the outreach, which is what I outlined on the slide earlier. So these kinds of outreach, project, installation, maintenance, monitoring, site assessment. For installation, you can either be the lead steward or a support steward. So maybe you helped somebody else with a project and you were a support, but you still obviously can count those hours. And then we've got continuing education and networking. Now, something really important I just want to point out is that all the projects, you see all these dots on the map here, those are all projects. So if you're reporting action on a project for a new site, then you'll need to add it as a new site. So you'll click on that and you will add all the information in here. When you type in the address, it will come up with the longitude and latitude automatically. And you can also look at the map. So sometimes the address might not be the most accurate. So you could also look at the map and kind of choose the exact spot where your project was. So that is what that looks like. And I would love for you guys to kind of explore that some more. You know, this is a new system, so you're the first class that is using it exclusively and from the beginning of your reporting your actions. So just, you know, feel free to reach out with any questions. Once everybody's kind of stewards and reporting action, we can have a training session to kind of talk through it, and you know, we can schedule that later on. So reach out to me if you have any questions, but definitely encourage you to explore it. And then I'm going to put the slides up along with some that will help you kind of walk through some of the steps. And then we've got those videos that hopefully a lot of you were able to watch and learn more about. That should be super helpful. So we have just a couple minutes for questions, but I want to let you know that we are going to have extended time, and we're going to have one on risk management, one on the reporting, and the third one will be on, thank you, capstones. So does anybody have any questions really quick?